Welcome to Currently, a weekly news roundup featuring conversations about the top local stories from the past 7 days from the journalists who are covering them. I'm your host, Christal Frost. Now, this podcast was recorded at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, February 20th. Things may change by the time you're watching or listening. Currently is made possible by underwriting from our generous lead supporter, Golden Fowler Home Furnishings, located on South Garfield Avenue in Traverse City. Home fashion elevated. Support also comes from West Shore Bank. When you choose West Shore Bank, you're not just choosing a bank, you're choosing a partner committed to the well-being of our community. Visit them today on 8th Street or at westshorebank.com. And from the Coin Slot Arcade Bar in Traverse City, a chill hangout boasting a full bar of 200-plus rotating cans, drafts, shooters, and pinball machines in a low-key setting. Now, joining me in the studio today, as always, head writer of the Traverse City Ticker, Ms. Beth Milligan.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good to be back.
It's good to see you again. And we have the editor of the Glen Arbor Sun, the discerning, fair, and always kind, Jakob Wheeler. Hi, Jakob.
Thanks for those words. Pleasure to be here.
I mean, I don't know if they're true, but
No, not really.
We don't fact check that.
I would say you are discerning, kind, and always fair.
I had to look up discerning to make sure I agree with it. Yeah.
I love it. Now, of course, the Ticker is a free multimedia daily news email and website. It's available to anyone who wants up-to-the-minute news and community information. So you can subscribe to the Ticker at traverseticker.com. And the Glen Arbor Sun is a free newspaper that covers Leelanau County events, characters, businesses, and the arts. And you guys publish 17 print editions a year, so every other week in the summer, and then monthly during the fall, winter, and spring. Mm-hmm. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Publishing fun?
For the most part. Sometimes having published is also fun. Right?
Having published. Yeah, that's how I feel about exercise.
Yeah.
I like having exercised. I don't like exercising.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can find out more at glenarborsun.com. So thank you both for coming in today. It's a pleasure to have you here. And we're going to start things off with one of your stories, Jakob, one of the ones that you published. Mm-hmm. And as we discuss a recent in-depth investigative story about how local schools are dealing with the executive order that strips places like schools and churches of safe haven status. Now, if you could take some time first to refresh our memories, it feels like there's been a lot of executive orders lately. So first of all, can you explain what was a safe haven status prior to this executive order and how have things changed now?
Yeah, no, it's February 20th, so it's been a month since Trump's inauguration. Mm-hmm. Things are happening very fast, very intense things. So prior to Trump's inauguration on January 20th, right, schools, churches, and also hospitals were considered safe haven areas where Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Patrol, ICE and CBP, they were guided not to ask for the status of children or parents or staff or patients or whatever during immigration raids. Those are considered safe spaces because the thinking was always that if they were to go into sensitive areas like hospitals, schools, and churches, it would create pandemonium. People wouldn't send their children to school, or they wouldn't go to hospitals. Or they wouldn't go to service to worship if they were afraid of being picked up. Those who were not just those who were undocumented, but perhaps those who were immigrants but didn't have their papers with them.
Sure.
Or those who had a family member who didn't have legal status. One of Trump's many executive orders did away with that. ICE and CBP are now permitted to go into these sensitive areas. And one of the effects of that was, schools everywhere in the United States, and certainly we know around here, in the 4 public schools in Leelanau County, also TCAP schools here in Grand Traverse County, have been, having intense meetings and informing their front office staff and their teachers on what to do if law enforcement, be it federal, state, or perhaps local, comes calling, asking for the immigration status of a student, a staff member, the family or parents who pick up their child from school, how to guide them through that. And one of the things that's been clarified to front office staff at all these schools is if law enforcement shows up, they need a judicial subpoena or a warrant in order to get information. Otherwise, they can't just ask for the status of someone. And in fact, school staff don't know the immigration status of their students. That's intentional. There's a longstanding tenet in public schools in this country that everyone is entitled to a public education, even if they're not a citizen.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's changed. So schools are afraid, and they've been taking steps to mitigate. One of the big questions here, though, and this is one of the things that my story and other coverage in Leelanau County and elsewhere, and Beth's as well, is what role would local law enforcement play, local sheriffs? Typically, immigration raids, arrests, deportations have been the work of the federal government. But one of the tenets of Trump's movement has been to deputize local law enforcement to feel as though they're entitled to sideline and arrest and deport undocumented immigrants. So there's this question lingering: what would local sheriffs do?
And that did complicate things because the Leelanau County Sheriff, Mike Borkovich, did make a series of statements to local media recently stating that he would cooperate with ICE if needed. But he did make it clear that he didn't think that raids in schools or churches would be necessary. At the same time, though, he's meeting with local business owners who, as we all know, rely on immigrant and migrant workforce. It's very, very important in Leelanau County especially. So he met with these folks after Trump's inauguration, and those attendees said that they felt that the sheriff understood their concerns. So could you give us some context as to, both of these roles? First, as you've stated, it's not necessarily practice for local law enforcement to act as maybe, federal agents, right?
Right.
But at the same time, you have the sheriff saying that he would cooperate if deputized, but also understanding the needs of business owners. Can you kind of walk us through that?
What Sheriff Borkovich has said when pressed, kind of the follow-up questions is, look, if ICE or CBP came and they were involved in a standoff with, attempting to arrest or just inquire about someone's documentation status, or if there was the threat of violence, and if asked, local police would help. But he also, didn't rule out playing a role in a school search. One of the nuances here, right, is that it depends, I guess, on what you consider a crime, right? Do you consider the crime to be a violent offense, or carrying a weapon without a permit, or threatening an officer with a knife, or does one consider the simple act of having crossed the border illegally a month ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago, as that the illegal offense? So what is illegal here? That's been one of the gray areas. But yeah, the sheriff met on January 10th with the superintendents of the 4 public schools in Leelanau County, Northport, Suttons Bay, Leelanau, and Glen Lake. And they'll hold meetings with the sheriff every once in a while, perhaps even once a year, but they simply were looking for some sort of, of course I wasn't at the meeting, but 2 of the superintendents spoke to me, and they were looking for some sign of what role he would or would not play if ICE came calling. And then, closer to the inauguration, a handful, I don't know the number, a handful of Leelanau County farmers met with Sheriff Borkovich. And again, they came away feeling as though he understood, according to Jim Bardenhagen, who spoke to me, they came away feeling as though the sheriff understood the importance of farm workers and agriculture, which is driven in large part by Hispanic families.
Right. So I have to ask you, Beth, because you've covered this locally in the Grand Traverse region, and folks maybe at the city police or the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Office have a little different take on this. They haven't been as forthright as maybe Sheriff Borkovich in talking about whether or not they would, or even saying that they would cooperate. So can you talk a little bit about the differences that you see between maybe these different county sheriff's offices?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a throwback to our first episode, and it's nice to have Jakob with us in the studio because when we talked about that episode, we did talk about Grand Traverse County, and I alluded to at the time that Leelanau County had a little bit of a different position than Grand Traverse. Our sister publication, the Leelanau Ticker, had talked to Sheriff Borkovich as well. I would say I think that the Grand Traverse County Sheriff Mike Shea and the Traverse City Police Department Chief Matt Richmond, I think they have been forthright. I think what's been challenging for communities across the country is that because these ICE raids have become so politicized, communities want to understand where the politics of their law enforcement agencies lie, because we are seeing different law enforcement agencies take positions. Some are expressing their own political views within those positions that they're taking. So some are very gung-ho and excited to work with ICE and clearly make it clear that they consider themselves to be, for example, like MAGA Republicans, and others have taken a stand and said very clearly that they are in opposition to these executive orders coming out of the Trump administration and do not want their communities to feel scared, will not cooperate with ICE. And then I think there is a middle ground. Mm-hmm. I would say maybe what Sheriff Borkovich's comments represent, and maybe what I heard in Glen Traverse County, which is that there are law enforcement agencies who also just feel uncomfortable with the fact that immigration is supposed to be a federal responsibility. It's not supposed to be a local responsibility. And they're a little bit caught in the middle of the expectation to participate in ICE raids. And so I think at least on the Glen Traverse County side in the city police department, they have said a little bit of what Jakob is talking about in Leelanau County, but they have said if there's a criminal element happening here, if there's a public safety situation, a criminal arrest, and we need to provide backup support, we do that. We work with our federal partners. We, at least in Glen Traverse County, do not want to go on proactive school raids. We don't want to go into churches. We don't want to make our community feel unsafe. We are not going to do ICE's job for them. So I think we have to keep in mind the context of this, that a lot of authorities feel uncomfortable compromising their relationships with communities. They want their residents to trust them, and they do not like the politicization of their offices in connection with immigration raids.
Yeah, that sounds, and that might be the difference is in the language of what Sheriff Borkovich is saying is, I will participate, my team will participate if asked, right? Versus, I don't want to participate necessarily because that's really not our jurisdiction.
It's entirely possible that the difference here is one of rhetoric and not of, and we're talking about hypothetical action. I've written about, there's one example that I know of in 2018, Customs and Border Patrol undercover agents staked out, they parked in a parking lot across from Leland High School, and they then tailed at a high speed through Leland. They followed a parent who had just dropped off their child at school, at Leland High School, and then they arrested this man, a longtime small business owner who had lived in the community for a long time and was trusted and respected. They arrested him. He spent a month in Sault Ste. Marie and is now back in the community. But they had trailed him, and that was, again, federal enforcement. Sheriff Borkovich and his deputies had nothing to do with that.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's good to know. Getting back to the heart of the matter here, though, you've mentioned superintendents having these intense conversations, trying to figure out how they continue to educate populations, all of their student populations, and dealing with what I'm assuming specifically for maybe the Latino or Hispanic populations, some real fear in the classroom. Do you have any insight as to how schools are hoping to ease some anxieties with students?
Yeah, I talked to some students. I talked to a migrant aide at Leland. They're hearing that unrest, that fear. I don't know that anyone has the magical solution. Sometimes I've heard superintendents and staff kind of talk away let's not speak of them just as Latinos or Hispanics. At the same time, if we look at demographics, that is the population that, with respect to this political issue, they're more vulnerable in northern Michigan.
And we should talk about the population. So there's 22,000 residents in Leelanau County, roughly.
Yeah.
And about 1,000 of those are identify as Latino or Hispanic.
Right, according to the latest census. And no one knows how many are came here legally and how many may be undocumented. There's no way to know. It's not a question that one asks. But there are likely many households where there is some family member who is undocumented. And what that means is that if there's a knock on the door, it could be that everyone in that household feels paranoid and worried or refuses to come to the door because of one person.
Wow. Well, thank you for that story, and thank you for your continued coverage, especially about how these, federal matters, these executive orders are trickling down and affecting local populations. We're going to go uber local for this next story here. And Beth, this has been a really busy week for the city of Traverse City. I mean, we're discussing everything from housing projects to two-way streets to sewer matters. So let's get into it. City Commission agenda included a hot topic in Northern Michigan, and this is all across Northern Michigan, and that is housing. So why don't you tell us about the new workforce housing project that was proposed by the Traverse City Housing Commission?
Yeah, so this is a proposed project near the intersection of East 8th Street and Lake Avenue, so right next to where Copy Central used to be, if you know that, near Riverine Apartments. The project would be a collaboration between many partners, the Traverse City Housing Commission, the city, which owns a little triangle of property right there next to the old Copy Central building, the County Land Bank Authority, which owns a strip of land that kind of goes along Lake Avenue down by Oriana, and then the private property owner of that former Copy Central building. So they're looking to cobble together several parcels to create 40 to 50 income restricted apartments. And this week was the Housing Commission meeting with the city to ask permission to get the city property part of that. So they're kind of basically lining up the dominoes to get this project into place. City commissioners did approve that. So the next step is, working on funding, because these are meant to be workforce housing apartments. That means specifically they have to have, different income levels, usually in that 40 to 60, sometimes up to 100% income level range of the area median income. They'll probably go to the state for funding help. There's been some different programs. Governor Whitmer recently announced a new employer-assisted housing program, so looking at that, a city pilot agreement, which is essentially like a tax break for workforce housing. There's going to have to be some environmental cleanup and then moving of power lines. But the goal is eventually, right, in a prominent kind of intersection downtown, to have these income restricted apartments. And this has been an ongoing thing that the city has really tried to push. Obviously, we've talked many times about the housing shortage in our area, but particularly whenever a project can happen in the downtown area, it makes it easy for people who are working downtown, or service workers, office workers, restaurant workers, to be able to live and work downtown, which is hard. Many of them are commuting in right now from quite a great distance and spending money parking downtown all day.
That's a thing.
And just having those access to services and trying to put more people who are in that workforce range in the actual heart of the city.
Yeah, it's exciting anytime we talk about bringing 40 to 50 new units, because as we all know, we need more housing.
Yes, and because the land in the city center is the most expensive land in Traverse City, the most desirable land, what we often see, and I know the ticker comment section is not always happy about it, is a lot of expensive condos, because that's like usually the highest and best use of land. So when you can get the pieces together through collaborative projects like this to have workforce housing, it's a great thing.
It's a good start.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioners also discussed extending the two-way street pilot on State, Pine, and Boardman. This has been a little controversial. It's been going on for 2 years?
Yes.
They want to extend it for another 2 years?
Yes, that was the proposal.
Okay.
So the Traverse City Downtown Development Authority had proposed extending this pilot, which had turned State Street, Pine Street, and Boardman Avenue to two-way traffic. So if you've driven in downtown Traverse City recently, you know that those streets, especially State Street is the main one, is now two ways. They used to be one way. They really have been testing this out for a couple of reasons. One, they've been testing the traffic flow of downtown Traverse City, particularly when Grandview Parkway was under reconstruction last year. They wanted ways for people to navigate downtown.
Oh, gosh, you just triggered something in my brain. I'm like,
a little bit easier. They're also trying to slow down the traffic in that corridor. If you've ever grown up as a teenager in Traverse City and cruised the gut, you know that people just plow down State Street when it's one-way traffic. And also to bring more business development to State Street. When you have two-way traffic going, the hope is people can park easily on both sides of the street. They can access it. So I would say, it wasn't a unanimous vote. Commissioners Tim Werner and Jackie Anderson were opposed. They wanted to see it go back to the one-way. They didn't feel that the pilot had been successful. The rest of the commissioners commissioners agreed to extend it through the end of this year.
Oh, okay.
So instead of 2 years, just one through the end of 2025. Collect more data. We won't have Grandview Parkway under construction near downtown. It'll be further out towards M72 this year. So that thought maybe it'll be more of a regular traffic flow downtown this year to see how it works. And also maybe look at some intersection changes. I think the main controversy, if you have been downtown, is you get stuck behind someone trying to make a left, and then that traffic will back up on State Street.
You're also triggering me here. So.
Yes. So I think the DDA has acknowledged that it still needs to be tweaked. There's also possible temporary changing Front Street traffic to two-way to see how that flows.
Wow.
So we'll see.
It used to be two-way back in the day.
It did.
Yeah. My
did.
father-in-law tells me that, but I mean, I wasn't here.
And obviously, there's challenges with that. We have delivery trucks. We've got pedestrians crossing. But the goal is just study it for another year, see how it works. And then I think the city would be looking at either making some of those changes permanent with some improvements, or saying, you know what, it's not really working. Let's go back to one way.
All right. So it's going to be two-way through the end of the year, at least at this point.
Yes.
All right. Good to know. Finally, we got to talk about sewers, and I'm going to see how many puns I can make during this process. Okay. So, forgive me in advance. It's a crappy job, but somebody's got to pay for it, right? And it sounds like bonding is the preferred method. Number one, what would these sewer bonds cover? And number two, what has to happen to get the work moving? I'm sorry, you guys.
I see what you did there, and I appreciate it.
I am 13.
So the City Commission had previously approved issuing up to $30 million in bonds. There are a lot of major sewer projects on deck the next several years, mostly at the wastewater treatment plant. One of the things that we're dealing with in many communities, not just Traverse City, but we have aging infrastructure. Yeah. We have inundation of, a lot of rain, big rain events. Water levels are fluctuating due in part to climate change. So communities are trying to get more resilient for the future. Sure. That requires a lot of significant investment, especially if infrastructure has been neglected for decades, which has been common across many communities because it's very expensive to invest in infrastructure. What the commission voted on this week was extending that bonding amount from $30 million up to $42 million, just reflecting some contingencies. Construction costs keep going up. Inflation is still up. So those costs have risen. The City Commission did approve that. What happens next? And this is just an interesting know your rights kind of thing as a voter. When there's major bonds like this, the city issues a notice that it's going to issue bonds. It lets kind of the public know. There is then a 45-day period in which voters can file a referendum petition to force that bond onto a ballot. So it just kind of gives the community the right to say, hey, we don't necessarily want you to issue $42 million in bonds without our approval. Most of the time, I would tell you voters don't care. Issuing bonds is kind of a low interest way to take care of infrastructure. Right. The city pays it off responsibly over time.
Yeah. And people don't seem to like to talk about infrastructure. It's just not sexy.
And bonding isn't sexy, although it is important. And these are the things that literally, again, take care of our environment, take care of our public health. But it does, we'll just have that referendum period. And if it passes and no one's interested in putting it on the ballot, then the bonds can be issued likely this summer.
All right. So that it could be, but it is, really good know your rights there.
Yeah, just to know.
Like
but
that.
Typically, often voters let that go because they know bonding is a good way to get major projects done.
I like it. Well,
graphics. With the right graphics, infrastructure could be sexy.
Let's circle back to then have Jakob maybe pull together some sexy infrastructure graphics.
Charts and graphics. That's what makes everything sexy. I love it. Well, coming up, we're going to discuss an upcoming documentary that explores the lost history of Black homesteaders in Leelanau County. But first, a word for our lead sponsor. A home office used to be something pretty rare. It was reserved for those TV dads like Dr. Jason Seaver on Growing Pains. Remember that show? But now many of us are working from home, and most of us need more than a kitchen table to do our best work. The home office is where our best ideas are launched. It's where we need to have important files both secure but easy to access. It's where important Zoom meetings take place. And don't you want your office to look like your Zoom backdrop? Because it's our sacred space for writing our best emails, brainstorming our most important ideas, and making our biggest deals. It's comfortable, but it's commerce. And that's where Golden Fowler Home Furnishings comes in. They understand that your home office furniture needs to make you happy to walk from your kitchen to your workplace every day. Furnish your new home office at Golden Fowler Home Furnishings on Garfield Avenue in Traverse City. We're home fashion elevated. And welcome back to Currently. Now, last week, both the Glen Arbor Sun and the Leelanau Ticker, sister publication of the Ticker, had a story about reclaiming the stories of Black pioneers in Leelanau County. Now, the story is truly remarkable, and the docu-film inspired by the story will preview on Sunday at the Bay Theater. But this whole thing really started with a Facebook message. Is that right, Jakob? Can you tell us what was in that Facebook message?
Yeah, sure. So a writer for the Glen Arbor Sun, Barry Kendall, wrote this story in our print edition last week. September of 22, a Grand Rapids man named Kevin Brooks, who has roots up here in this area and is kind of an amateur genealogist, he sent a life-changing Facebook message to two African-American women cousins in Atlanta, Carmen Hobson and Colleen Burton, with the discovery that their families were inextricably linked more than 100 years ago in Empire Township near Little Glen Lake.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the Facebook message then led to some, like at least one Zoom meeting, right?
Zoom meeting, and they also visited Kevin and they checked out the homestead where Carmen and Colleen's grandmother had homesteaded. She was a young girl, basically, and neighbors who became very close with Kevin's descendants based on a death and kind of the need of rural neighbors, if you will.
Oh, this is such a cool story. And, it's interesting, too, because this has really led to the creation of a documentary film. And Beth, can you tell us how the film came to be and what's going to happen on Sunday at the Bay?
Yeah, absolutely. So Joe Vandermeulen directed the film, and the Leelanau Historical Society has helped support and fund it. So it's going to be screening, the first kind of preview screening at the Bay this Sunday at 2 o'clock. Doors open at 1 o'clock. I think the tickets are $12. And I know I volunteer for the Bay Theater. We've been excited for this event, and the tickets have been selling really fast. So
good.
I think we're going to have a full house on Sunday. The film's producer and key participants are going to be there. Isaiah Smith, who narrated film, was going to be there. And then I think there will be a larger premiere also coming in May. But I think what's really interesting about this film and what the Glen Arbor Sun covered and Leelanau Ticker covered, especially during Black History Month, is just to talk about, I think, this is something that our region has struggled with a lot because we have so many white people that live here now. It's a very Caucasian area. However, the contributions of Native Americans and Black ancestors that we've had here, these Black homesteaders who were help breaking ground. I think white stories are often centered in our region, but these folks were really here. Some of them were here first and have helped enormously with the history of our region. So it's a chance to shine a spotlight, I think, on a group that is often overlooked. We don't hear about Black homesteaders, I think, in Leelanau County or in northern Michigan very often. So it's a unique story. I have not seen the film yet. I'm really excited to see it on Sunday, but I've heard, it's very inspirational. These families reconnecting, generations later, to see what their families have in common today, and then also to dig in that history of the past.
No, I love it. And in the Sun story, Jakob, there's a quote from the Leelanau Historical Society's Kim Kelderhouse, and she's repeating a quote shown in the film of one of their volunteers. And I think this is a powerful quote. It says, history is often written by those who stay. And that's, I think, really important. And since all of this was started from Kevin Brooks's genealogy efforts, right? Just like going through genealogy, trying to fill in the gaps. Now that kind of, genealogy, but also DNA kits, it's so widely available for families to complete their family stories. Do you believe that, there's going to be more of this, more, stories that are reclaimed and maybe correcting a little bit of regional history?
Yeah, I hope so. It's great. And we should give a plug for the name of the film. I don't know if we mentioned it yet. The film, which will be at the Bay this weekend, it's called The Search for Anna and Levi. The subtitle is A Lost History of Black Homesteaders in Leelanau County. Yeah, and Ms. Hobson and Ms. Burton's Atlanta residents, it was their grandmother, Australia Bryce Young, yeah, her young years were on this homestead, but she left. She didn't stay in northern Michigan. And, Kevin Brooks's family did, and many of those who came later and our families did. So we've told the history. We're in an amazing, tumultuous and sometimes hard period in American history and American awareness, where we're telling stories of those who were here first and why we tell the narratives we do, and what narratives we've papered over, whether they be those of Black homesteaders or Native Americans. It's a hard history. It's hard stories to tell. But yeah, I hope that Kim Kelderhouse is prophetic in that.
Yeah, I do too. I really do. So how can people get tickets?
Yes. So they're on the Bay Theater website, which is thebaytheater.com. And theater is spelled with a TRE at the end.
Ooh, the fancy way.
Baytheater.com. Yeah. And I should just mention that, this film is the first in a series at the Bay called the Made in Michigan series. So this series centers on Michigan filmmakers showing their films at a local theater. The filmmakers are often present to talk with audiences. There's a few more coming up. That information's on the Bay's website, but this will kick off the season.
Well, honestly, great stories from both of the publications, Glen Arbor Sun and the Leelanau Ticker. I mean, I love reading stories like that. I love ending with good stories like that too. There's just, sometimes you feel like you're kind of inundated with bad news, so it's nice to end on a good note. But before we leave, I have to ask you both, what's one thing that you're looking forward to either this weekend or next week? And Beth, I'll have you go first.
Yes, my plug this week is for Traverse City Restaurant Week. I am a huge Restaurant Week fan. I'm a big foodie in general. I love eating out. I think we're so blessed in northern Michigan. We have so many beautiful farms and farmers, but also farm-to-table restaurants, great chefs. And Traverse City Restaurant Week is, it's expanded over the years from the outside the downtown area into kind of the region at large. There's dozens of restaurants participating with these sort of prefix menus. And it starts on Sunday and goes through next Saturday. And if you go to the Traverse City Downtown Development Authority website or Traverse City Tourism, they have a whole passport that you can get. You can check in when you go to a restaurant and get entered in prizes. I'm not getting paid to say any of this. I just love Restaurant Week. It's very fun, and I have a couple of reservations next week.
You do?
Yes.
All right. Like how many? Just give or take.
I have at least 3 and plans to maybe go to 1 or 2 more.
All right. So yeah, Restaurant Week is on my list, and I feel like Restaurant Week is for me because it's my birthday. It always lands on my birthday, and I love that. So I can just go, oh, it's my birthday week, and go
sing
to
for you right
now? Jakob could sing for you.
Please do not. Yes, you may, but yeah. So next Wednesday is my birthday, so I get to go out to Restaurant Week, and then we do this. It's become kind of a tradition. We do it every year, and I love that.
It's just a great way if there's a new restaurant you haven't checked out yet. It's a good way to kind of get a feel for their menu. So.
I do want to say a plug too for restaurants in Leelanau County. I know that Natolo's in Lake Leelanau, they're doing Restaurant Week at the same time. So there's a couple of Leelanau County restaurants as well in there too. So how about you? What are you looking forward to next week?
Beth, can I be in your shoes? I think I'd rather do the Restaurant Week stories. It sounds delectable. I feel like a bit of a Debbie Downer because I don't want to close on a tough note. What I've been working on today and in the days to come, some more stories of kind of the effects of the executive orders from the White House in the last month. I've been interviewing some who have been let go or fired or terminated by the national park or Sleepy News National Lakeshore, and learning how that's affected their lives. Some who will go on record, some will not or are not able to. But also looking into some of the ways that layoffs and also a hiring freeze of seasonal workers may well really significantly affect our Sleepy News National Lakeshore experience this spring, summer, and fall.
We would love to have you back on to talk more about that. And it's not a Debbie Downer situation. It's reality.
It's important.
We're really glad that you're covering those stories because, as we always talk about, it's not happening somewhere out there in the ether. It's affecting real people here at home. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to say thank you to our guest journalists, as always, Beth Milligan, head writer for the Traverse City Ticker, and Jakob Wheeler, editor of the Glen Arbor Sun. Now, we're going to be back next Friday with a special guest journalist. Allie Baxter is going to join us from Up North Live. You can find out more about the show at christalfrost.com. You can follow us on social media. We're all over the place. We're even on TikTok. I made a TikTok.
Boom.
I did TikTok. I did it wrong the first time. I did. I was like, oh, where's the camera? And then I was like, oh, you're live. What's happening here? It was very strange. But we did it. We did TikTok. And you can subscribe to Currently with Christal Frost wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, just whatever you do. You can also watch the full show on YouTube and Facebook. Shows are brand new every Friday, and they launch at 6 a.m. bright and early. We've got those people doing that. Big thanks to our lead supporter, Golden Fowler Home Furnishings. Currently is made possible by that underwriting. Golden Fowler Home Furnishings on South Garfield Avenue in Traverse City. Home fashion elevated. Also comes from West Shore Bank. And don't forget, West Shore Bank is a community bank. They're your community partners on 8th Street or at westshorebank.com. And then, of course, the Coin Slot Arcade Bar in Traverse City. Now, we like to end these conversations, Jakob, with a little bit of pinball. I'm a big fan of pinball. I know Beth is a big fan of pinball as well. There's just something about a long day covering the news and then just kind of taking it out on a pinball machine. Are you into that? You want to do that?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
let's get our pinball on.
The Earth is being invaded by flying saucers from Mars.
Listen, I should be getting good at this by now, but I don't know if I am.
So the thing about me doing this week after week is I've learned their weaknesses.